When German troops rolled into the Soviet Union in 1941, they thought victory would take only months. Their panzers had crushed Poland, France, and much of Europe. Nothing they believed could stop them. But then came a tank they'd never seen before, sloped armor, speed that defied its weight, and a gun that tore through their prized panzer divisions like paper. The T-34. It wasn't just a machine. It was the turning point of the Eastern Front, a weapon that turned despair into defiance and defiance into victory. This is the story of how a single tank, born in secrecy and forged in fire, saved the Soviet Union from collapse. By June 1941, Nazi Germany had launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in history. More than 3 million German soldiers stormed across the border, backed by thousands of tanks and aircraft. The Soviet Union was caught off guard. Its army was enormous but outdated. Many of its tanks were light, thinly armored, and poorly armed, like the BT and T-26 models. Against the German Panzer III and IV, they were little more than mobile coffins. Soviet soldiers faced disaster. Entire divisions were encircled. Cities burned. The Wehrmacht advanced almost unopposed. But deep inside the Soviet industrial network, a new kind of tank was waiting. One designed not for parade grounds but for survival. The idea? Function over form. In the 1930s, a small team of Soviet engineers at the Kharkov locomotive factory began designing a new medium tank. At the time, tank design worldwide was stuck in old thinking. Thick, vertical armor and sluggish movement. The Soviets had a different vision. A fast, resilient tank that could operate independently, cross rough terrain, and withstand direct hits. The result of their work was the T-34, a project led by designer Mikhail Koshkin and his deputy Alexander Morozov. They built it around 4 revolutionary principles. Sloped armor, angled plates that deflected shells instead of absorbing them. This gave it the protection of a much heavier tank without the added weight. Wide tracks, allowing it to glide over mud, snow, and ice, essential for the brutal Russian winters where German tanks often froze or bogged down. Diesel engine, safer, more efficient, and more reliable than the gasoline engines of its enemies. Powerful gun. A 76.2 mm cannon capable of destroying any German tank of 1941 from a distance. It was ugly, crude, simplified for mass production. But it was genius, a machine built not to impress engineers but to win wars. In early 1940, prototypes of the T-34 were secretly tested. The results shocked even its creators. It could reach speeds over 50 km per hour on roads and almost 30 km per hour off-road, unheard of for a 26-ton tank. It could climb steep hills, ford rivers, and even break through barbed wire. Its armor shrugged off hits from most anti-tank guns of the time. But there was a catch: the tank was demanding to drive. The controls were heavy, visibility was poor, and mechanical reliability was still unproven. Still, the Soviet leadership saw enough promise to approve mass production. Factories in Kharkov and Stalingrad began building it, even as Europe burned. When the German invasion began, Hitler's generals were confident. Their panzers were modern, their tactics proven. But then, near the town of Msensk in October 1941, something unexpected appeared on the horizon: the T-34. German anti-tank weapons bounced off its sloped armor. Panzer shells sparked harmlessly as Soviet crews returned fire and destroyed their attackers one after another. German General Heinz Guderian, father of Blitzkrieg tactics, later wrote, "The T-34 was a shock. Our weapons were ineffective against it. It was superior to our tanks in every respect." For the first time in the war, the Wehrmacht's armored spearheads hesitated. The T-34 was not invincible. It broke down often, and early models suffered from unreliable transmissions and poor optics. But it had one overwhelming advantage: simplicity. Where German tanks were handcrafted masterpieces, the T-34 was designed to be mass-produced by unskilled labor. Its parts could be replaced easily, its engine repaired in the field, and its armor welded by workers who had never seen a tank before. Each time a T-34 was destroyed, 2 more rolled off an assembly line. That math alone began to change the war. Early T-34s carried a 76.2 mm gun, powerful enough for the Panzer III and IV. But as Germany introduced the Tiger and Panther tanks, the Soviets needed more firepower. In 1943, engineers introduced the T-34-85, an upgraded model with thicker armor and a new 85 mm gun. It was faster, tougher, and deadlier, capable of killing the feared Tiger at typical combat ranges. Production was so rapid that by the time German forces faced the new model at the Battle of Kursk, entire battalions were equipped with it. The T-34-85 became the spearhead of the Soviet counteroffensive. For all its brilliance, the T-34 was not a comfortable place to fight. Its interior was cramped, hot in summer, freezing in winter. The crew had little visibility, and the noise of the diesel engine made communication almost impossible. But Soviet crews adapted. They learned to use their tanks like wolves, hunting in packs, ambushing German armor from multiple angles, never letting a superior enemy choose the ground. Training was often rushed, sometimes only a few weeks, but courage filled the gaps. Many T-34 drivers went into battle knowing their chances of surviving the first engagement were low. But they also knew something else. Their tank could take the fight to the Germans in a way no other Soviet weapon could. For many of them, the T-34 wasn't just steel. It was revenge for burned villages and fallen families. By the summer of 1943, Germany launched its last great offensive on the Eastern Front, Operation Citadel, better known as the Battle of Kursk. It would become the largest tank battle in history. Over 6,000 armored vehicles clashing across open fields and smoking ridges. The Germans brought their new beasts, the Tigers and Panthers, heavy, menacing, armored to the teeth. But they were slow, expensive, and mechanically fragile. The Soviets met them with swarms of T-34s. As the battle unfolded, it became clear that quality couldn't outpace quantity. The Germans could destroy dozens of T-34s, but hundreds more kept coming. The fields around Prokhorovka turned into a storm of fire and steel, but when the smoke cleared, the Red Army still stood. The German advance had been stopped cold. From that moment on, the Wehrmacht would never again regain the initiative in the east. And at the heart of that victory was one machine, the T-34. After the Battle of Kursk in 1943, the balance of power on the Eastern Front changed forever. The Soviet Union had not only stopped the German advance, it was now pushing back. And leading every charge at the head of every armored column was the same green silhouette, the T-34. From Kursk to Kiev, Minsk to Warsaw, the T-34 became the hammer of Soviet offensives. It crossed rivers, climbed frozen ridges, and smashed through defenses that had once seemed impenetrable. The German High Command, once confident in its engineering superiority, now faced an enemy whose strength lay in brutal efficiency. The T-34 had become more than a weapon, it was a statement. The Red Army was coming and nothing could stop it. By 1944 and 1945, the Red Army's advance had turned into a rolling storm of armor. Hundreds of T-34s poured westward through Poland, across the Vistula River and into Germany itself. They were no longer just machines, they were symbols of vengeance. Each bore scars of battles past, dents, burns, makeshift repairs welded in the field. When the Soviets reached the outskirts of Berlin, the city's defenders found themselves surrounded by the same tanks that had haunted them since Kursk. Street by street, block by block, T-34s led the assault, battering buildings, supporting infantry and taking devastating losses. But the Soviet numbers were overwhelming. And on May 2, 1945, as Berlin fell, it was a T-34 that rolled through the shattered streets to the Reichstag, the same tank model that had once been dismissed as crude, unrefined, and inferior. The weapon that had been designed to save a nation had helped end a war. Peace didn't end the T-34's story. It merely changed the battlefield. The Soviets had built so many, over 57,000 during the war, that they began exporting them around the world. From Eastern Europe to Asia, Africa to the Middle East, the T-34 became the standard-bearer of post-war armored power. It fought in Korea, where North Korean crews used it against American Sherman tanks. It rumbled through the streets of Budapest in 1956, during the Hungarian uprising. It appeared again in the Middle East, used by Arab armies in the 1967 and 1973 wars. Even decades after its creation, it was still fighting, still surviving. Few machines in history have fought across so many continents, under so many flags for so long. Many myths surround the T-34. Some claim it was invincible, it wasn't. Others call it the greatest tank ever made. That depends on how you define greatness. But what's undeniable is that it changed how the world designed tanks. The concept of sloped armor, now standard, started here. The focus on mass production and field maintenance inspired generations of engineers. Even modern tanks like the Leopard, the Abrams, and the T-90 trace parts of their design DNA back to lessons learned from the T-34. It taught nations that simplicity wins wars more often than sophistication. In Soviet memory, the T-34 became sacred. It was the tank that saved the motherland, the steel hero of the Great Patriotic War. Every major Soviet city built a monument with a T-34 at its heart, not for its technology but for what it represented: resilience. You can still see them today, perched on pedestals, still carrying the faded red stars of the soldiers who drove them into history. To Western historians, it remains an engineering triumph. To veterans, it was both savior and tomb. To the Soviet people, it was proof that a nation could be broken and still rebuild itself from steel and courage.